Fine sirs and gentlewomen, my name is Rip Van Winkle. You see, I am a fictional character from the author Washington Irving. You may have read one of his stories called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Now, you see, my story, called Rip Van Winkle, after me, was written around the same time. It was written 40 years after the Revolutionary War. The story you will read today is a story of sadness and happiness and mystery. Please, the first thing that you will need today is a writing utensil of some kind. The next thing you will need is your reader, and then you will need your activity book. Now, please turn with me, Rip Van Winkle, to a page in your activity book. The page you will be on is called page 139, 15.2, vocabulary for me, my story, Rip Van Winkle. Yes, it is a strange name, but please, let's look at the vocabulary so we know what these words mean as we read them in context. The first word is provoke, to cause something to happen, to bring out anger in a person or people. Second, console, to comfort or try to make someone feel better and less sad. Third word, peal, a loud noise or repeated noises. And four, nine pins, my favorite game, a bowling game played with 9 pins. 5, what I am wearing right now, breeches, pants that cover the hips down to just below the knee. 6, melancholy, sad or depressed, what I feel in this story. 7, skeptical, doubtful. 8 is revere, to respect or honor, much like my friend Paul Revere. And 9, henpecked, describes my wife. It's used to describe a man who is constantly controlled and criticized by his wife, which you'll see happens in my story. So please, please pay attention to these words. They are so important in our story today. It is Rip Van Winkle. It starts on page 72. Please follow along, because this story will answer the question, how does the author, Washington Irving, weave fact and fiction together in the telling of Rip Van Winkle? Rip Van Winkle, adapted from the story by Washington Irving. In a village in the Catskill Mountains, there lived a simple, good-natured fellow by the name of Rip Van Winkle. He was a good neighbor, and the children would shout with joy whenever he approached. Rip Van Winkle was a lovable soul who was ready to attend to anybody's business but his own. As to keeping his own farm in order, he found it impossible, and his children were as ragged as if they belonged to nobody. Rip was one of those happy souls who lived without a care, ate white bread or brown, whichever required less thought or trouble, and preferred to starve on a penny than work for a pound. If left to himself, he would have whistled his life away in perfect contentment, that meaning he was happy where he was. But his wife was continually complaining about his laziness and the ruin he was bringing upon his family. Rip would shrug his shoulders, shake his head, cast up his eyes, but say nothing. This always provoked a fresh attack from his wife, so he frequently left the house to go outside. Rip used to console himself when driven from home with the company of a group of other men who met on a bench in front of an inn. Sitting beneath a portrait of His Majesty, King George III, they talked over village gossip and told stories. This man was my king at the time. They would listen as Van Bummel, the schoolmaster, read aloud its contents. All kinds of discussions followed the reading of the newspaper. Nicholas Vedder, a respected elder member of the village, made his opinions known by the manner. This is a very important picture. We're going to stop here. So, let's think about when it said, is ready to attend to anybody's business but his own. So what it's saying here about me, how dare it, I neglect things in my own life for which I should be responsible. I am not taking care of my own family. And here I am with my friends listening to the newspaper. So let's start. Made his opinions known by the manner in which he smoked his pipe. Short puffs indicated anger. When he was pleased, he inhaled the smoke slowly and expelled it in light, delicate clouds. One day, seeking to escape the hard work of the farm and the complaints of his wife, Rip grabbed his gun and walked into the Catskill Mountains to hunt for squirrels. All the day, the mountains echoed with the sounds of shots fired from his gun. Finally, he sat down on a little green hill that looked down into the valley below. Rip admired the scene as evening gradually advanced and sighed as he thought about the journey home. As he was about to descend, he heard a voice calling, "Rip Van Winkle! Rip Van Winkle!" He caught sight of a strange figure climbing up the rocks, carrying something on its back. Rip was surprised to see any human being in this lonely place, but he concluded that it must be one of his neighbors in need of assistance. Rip hurried down to help. The stranger was a short old fellow with a grizzled beard. This means that it's old, scraggly, and gray. His clothes were old-fashioned, and he carried a stout keg, meaning short bottle, that Rip was supposed was full of something refreshing to drink. He made signs for Rip to assist him, and together they clambered up a narrow gully. Every now and then, long rolling peals like thunder seemed to issue out of a deep ravine. Passing through this ravine, they came to a hollow. In the center was a company of odd-looking persons playing at ninepins. Remember, this is my favorite bowling game. The thunderous noise Rip had heard from afar was the sound of a ball rolling toward the pins. Like Rip's guide, they were dressed in an outlandish fashion with enormous breeches. What seemed particularly odd to Rip was that these folks looked serious, very serious indeed. They played without speaking and were, in fact, the most melancholy party he had ever witnessed. They were very sad. They stared at Rip in such a way that his heart turned within him and his knees banged together. Well, what did I do? Rip and his guide joined the party. His guide emptied the keg into large tankards, and men sipped in silence. When they were done, they returned to their game. As Rip's fears subsided, he ventured, means I went out to taste. What did I taste? So here I am with all these strange-looking men. To taste the beverage too. Before long, the events of the day and the mountain air overpowered Rip, and he fell. I fell into a deep sleep. Upon waking, Rip found himself on the green hill where he had first seen the old man. It was a bright sunny morning. Surely, thought Rip, I have not slept here all night. He recalled the strange men. Oh, what excuse shall I make to Dame Van Winkle? He looked around for his gun, but found only an old rusty firearm. My old gun. But it was new before I fell asleep. Suspecting he had been robbed, he decided to find the old-fashioned men and demand his gun. As he rose to walk, he found himself stiff in the joints. With some difficulty, he found the gully up and which he and his companion had ascended, but could find no traces of the ravine that had led to the area with the odd little men playing ninepins. He shouldered the rusty firearm, which means I put it to my shoulder. With a heart full of trouble, turned his steps homeward. I was heading home. As he approached the village, he met a number of people.
but none whom he knew. This surprised him, for he thought he was acquainted, meaning he knew a lot. He knew them well with every one of his neighbors. Though he thought he was, but he wasn't. Their dress, too, was of a different fashion. They all stared at him with surprise and stroked their chins. When Rip did the same, he found to his astonishment, meaning surprise, that his beard had grown a foot long. A troop of children ran at his heels, hooting after him and pointing at his gray beard. This made me very sad. There were houses in village that he had never seen before, with unfamiliar names over the doors, meaning names I do not know, that are not familiar to me. He began to wonder whether he and the world around him, both he and the world around him, were bewitched. And if you remember, this word means magical. So here's a picture of the children running at my heels, hooting, that means yelling after me, and pointing at my gray beard. Oh, what a surprise it was. With some difficulty, he found his own house. The roof had fallen in and the door was off its hinges. He entered and called for his wife and children, but all was silent. He spotted a dog that looked like his own and called out to him, but the dog snarled and showed his teeth. My own dog has forgotten me, sighed poor Rip. He hurried to the village inn. Before it now hung a flag with stars and stripes. He spotted the face of King George on the sign. But now his red coat was blue, his head wore a cocked hat, and underneath the figure was printed General Washington. There was a crowd of people around the door, but none that Rip knew. He inquired, meaning he asked, "Where's Nicholas Vedder?" So I want you to think about what it means. Who is this General Washington? And remember, previously it was the red coats that I would have seen, but now they are blue. And this General Washington is the army, the Continental Army that had defeated King George's army. So now I'm very unfamiliar with what's going on. I have no idea that this this Revolutionary War was fought. I somehow had slept through it. There was silence. Then an old man replied, "Nicholas Vedder? Why, he is dead and gone these 18 years. Where's Van Bummel, the schoolmaster?" asked Rip. "He went off to wars and is now in Congress," the old man answered. Rip's heart sank, meaning it dropped. It was sad at hearing these sad changes. "I'm not myself," he said sadly. "I was myself last night, but I fell asleep. Now everything has changed and I can't tell who I am. Here I am, with my big beard." The bystanders looked at each other in puzzlement. Then a young woman pressed through the throng, meaning the crowd. She had a child in her arms, which, frightened by the gray-bearded man's looks, began to cry. "Hush, Rip," she murmured. "The old man won't hurt you." The name of the child and heir of the mother, meaning child of the mother, awakened long ago memories in Rip's mind. He caught the mother in his arms and said, "I am your father. Young Rip Van Winkle once, old Rip Van Winkle now. Does nobody know poor Rip Van Winkle?" So here, when I say I am your father, I am talking to the young woman. She is my daughter, and she does not know, and the child she is holding is my grandson, named after me, Rip. All stood amazed for a while. Then an old woman exclaimed, "Sure enough, it is Rip Van Winkle. Welcome home again, old neighbor. Why, where have you been these 20 years? Then I realized I had been sleeping for 20 years, up in the mountains. Rip's story was soon told, for the whole 20 years had been to him but one night. Many were skeptical, meaning they did not believe, but an old man who was well versed in the local traditions confirmed his story in the most satisfactory, means most accurate manner. He assured the company that the Catskill Mountains had always been haunted by strange beings or ghosts, and that his own father had once seen these odd little men playing ninepins in the hollow of the mountain. Rip's daughter took him home to live with her. Her mother had died some years before. Oh, remember that old woman that yelled at me for not taking care of my own family? Yes, she had died. I wasn't very sad. Having arrived at that happy age when a man can retire and rest, Rip took his place once more on the bench at the inn and was revered as one of the wise old men of the village. He used to tell his story to every stranger that arrived. Some doubted the truth of it, but the old villagers gave Rip full credit. Even to this day, whenever a thunderstorm blows in, they say that the odd little men are at their game of ninepins, and it is a common wish of all the hen-pecked husbands who are bugged by their wives in the neighborhood when life hangs heavy on their hands, that they might take themselves up into the Catskill Mountains in search of an adventure, really to avoid their nagging wives. Now, I want you to think about what had happened before. I fell asleep before the Revolutionary War had occurred, and when I woke, I was an old man 20 years later, unaware that the Revolutionary War had begun and that King George III was no longer king, but that we had been replaced by a president, by George Washington. Once young I was, and then old I became.
Now, I hope you enjoyed my story. Although this story is fiction and not true, I believe myself to be a character that has lived through many cultures, and they've adopted this story to be in all countries and revised it so it fits in their country. Feel free to look it up and see for yourself. Now, just a few more things I want to add before I leave you today. I want to give you some help and guidance because that is what an old man does. Now, excuse me. Now, please turn to your activity book. The page you will be on today isn't very long. It's quite simple. And what you are going to do on this page, right here on page 143, you're going to write the correct vocabulary words that we already went over from the word bank to complete the sentence. The best way to practice words and putting them in the right places is to try all the words and see which one sounds the best in context of the sentence. I'm going to say peal. The villagers listened to the peal of the church bells as the wedding ceremony ended, because peal means noise or repeated noises, and that would be church bells as they continued to ring back and forth. Number 2, the long gray winters with little sunshine made my whole family, that's an easy one, melancholy, because melancholy means sad. So when you have a long winter, you feel very sad, and I do as well. Number 3, although both games are played with pins and balls, the scoring for bowling is quite different from that of easy. What do you think? 9 pins. And number 4, some young schoolboys still wear woolen, I still wear these, breeches to school. All right, my friends, thank you so much for answering these. Now, I am going to go back to the Catskill Mountains and go take a long nap. Hi, 4th graders. It's Mrs. Zorak. I hope you enjoyed our special guest. He was quite interesting to have in my home. I kicked him out, so he's gone now. But I was so grateful that he was able to read our Rip Van Winkle story to us today. So thank you, Mr. Rip Van Winkle, for telling your story. Hope you enjoyed him. Now, one last thing that I want you to do today, because he's been so helpful, and I know that you guys have been doing amazing with your work. Yesterday, you guys learned about helping verbs, or what we call modal auxiliary verbs. And then before that, Mrs. Mitchell had gone over what we call to-be verbs. So I'm going to give you a page number and give you a little bit of guidance for some independent practice, okay? Here we go. Okay, guys, this will be the last page that you do today for language arts, okay? Now, this page is more just a review of what you already know. It's going to be on page 147, okay? Page 147, called to be verbs and auxiliary verbs. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to grab a pencil and you're going to, it gives you some examples of what you can use, okay? So in those examples, it says to be verbs, you can use some examples, am, are, is. And then the modal auxiliary verbs, these are all different types of verbs, right? Can, might, and will. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and help you with a few of them. Here we go. Not far from the Hudson River. A little valley known as Sleepy Hollow. Well, I'm going to think is. Okay, but I have to think, am I going to skip anything? Not from the Hudson River. Oh, no, I don't need anything else. Is a little valley known as Sleepy Hollow. All right, number 2. In the legend of Sleepy Hollow, there, I can use the same word again, is, right? There is a teacher by the name of Ichabod Crane. So those are all great to be verbs. You need those when you're attaching a sentence together, okay? So let's go over one that's a little bit trickier, okay? So if I skip something, that means you need to go back and finish it on your own. Okay, so any ones that are a little bit trickier, let's see. Remember, we can do can, might, or will. Let's try some helping verbs here. Okay. All right, let's do this one. Number 5, Ichabod can read. He especially likes to read scary stories. And then number 7, let's see. Let's do that one. One day, Ichabod does not show up at school. The pupils worried. What? Let's see. We could say, well, what are they? They are worried. What might? Let's try that one because that's a word we can use. What might have happened is that possibility helping verbs. All right. So number 9, you may be a little bit confused on that one. Okay. So number 9, I'll grab my little pencil here. Blank, read too. I, afraid to read scary stories because, Okay, so this kind of uses a combination of our to be, and it also has some helping verbs in there too. Okay, so I'm saying here's my to be verb, I am, or excuse me, I'm gonna use my helping verb here. I can read too. Let's use my to be verb here. I am afraid to read scary stories because let's use our helping verb here, they might give me nightmares. Okay, so there's some good examples that you can use on this activity page today. It's going to be the only one that you do independently, so you can use the ones that I used and then try to finish up all of them on page 147. Thank you so much for joining me today, and of course, joining Rip Van Winkle, he was here too. But I will see you next time. Bye, have a great day.